Y'all ready for this?
You're a terrible person. That's the start of the show. Good evening, this is Nerds at Night. Welcome to the show. I'm Tolly.
And you're a lying jerk.
That's fair.
But I'm non-lethal.
For those who haven't been counting, this is episode number 10, the big 1-0. We're pretty excited to finally be getting up there in episode numbers.
Yeah, it's a pretty exciting time. 10 episodes of people listening to us rant about things you probably don't care about. But hey, we like doing it and we do it for you.
That's right. And so we're going to mix up the orientation of the show. We've decided that from now on we're going to discuss mostly card games and board games exclusively. So things like solitaire, poker, particularly Texas Hold'em, and things like that. We're going to get away from video games because we think that's covered a bit too much in mainstream media.
That's right, yeah. We're going to change our entire business model and do something completely different that none of our listeners want to hear about.
You're welcome, everyone. And for those of you still listening, that was bullshit. We will be talking about retro gaming, reboots, remakes, and all that sort of good stuff that's been happening in the gaming industry over the last couple of years or so.
Yeah, it seems to be a fad in both Hollywood and in the gaming industry where the developers are taking old games or just old ideas and trying to bring them into a new light, and we're going to be discussing them at length.
That's a parallel not typically drawn between Hollywood and the games industry, two industries that exclusively recycle old shit to try and make it seem new and interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if we should talk about that perhaps in the future at some stage.
Yes, we should. That should be an episode of great quality and length.
Yes, we should write that down for future use. Wink.
I'm writing it right now. Anyway, we're just going to cycle through some games because we're having a bit of trouble thinking of how we were going to discuss this and get through it and all that sort of stuff. And it's like the easiest way to talk about these reboots and remakes is really the games that have spawned this almost new genre all of its own. So I'm going to kick it off with a big one that came out a little while ago. I say a little while ago, it was probably like a year ago, I don't remember. Tomb Raider was recently completely given to a new studio and rebooted, and for lack of a better phrase, I thought it was friggin' awesome. Did you play it non-lethal?
I can neither confirm or deny my ability of not playing this game.
You are the worst human being I know.
Look, I'm here for my good looks and charisma. I'm not here for my gaming ability, apparently, if you've watched our Titanfall stream, which you haven't because it's not up yet.
This is true. You have a face for radio.
You're a lovely man. Have I ever told you that?
No, no one ever does.
Yeah.
Why won't they love me?
There's many reasons.
Alright, so we'll get back to it. Tomb Raider it's been around for decades, you know, back since Lara Croft had square tits on the original PlayStation and all that sort of stuff. And it's had a lot of sequels and it's gone through different phases, most of them crap. But there's been some good games out of it, and they recently rebooted it, and it was all HD and shiny, and we got an origin story for Lara, and it was brilliant. The way they did it. It was a story where they actually had a female protagonist that was represented as not either just a sex icon or a helpless damsel in distress. She starts out really helpless, and within the first 20 or 30 minutes or so really kicks some ass and becomes the female protagonist we remember from the old series. So they've taken the original content and brought it into the current generation. They've made it a really interesting game that I'm sure will now spin off into its own series of sequels.
Well, I think they've already announced they're doing the sequel to it, but what I find interesting about it, just as a little aside, is that her, like many other characters in games recently, her main weapon is a bow and arrow, like movies and video games coming together.
Yeah, that's happened a lot lately. What's up with that? Like, there was this huge, big, just thing, really, where someone must have done bow and arrow. I think it was like Brave or something may have been the trendsetter for that. And then suddenly everything had bows and arrows. There was Hunger Games, Tomb Raider, Crisis 3. Any others I'm forgetting?
Probably. But look, you think you're getting out of order. Neither of us are teenage girls, so we don't really know what started it all. But I'm willing to bet it was actually the Hunger Games that started it. And people were like, people like bows and arrows. Give everyone bows and arrows. We're kind of going a bit off track there. Tomb Raider.
No, I want to go back to bows and arrows. This is bullshit. Who decided this would be a thing? Who the hell gets to make these decisions?
I don't know, but it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, as the old saying goes. You're literally bringing a bow and arrow to a gunfight. Like, who's going to win there?
I read somewhere that Genghis Khan revolutionised warfare with the bow and arrow. It's how he created such a large empire.
Well, it's because all these people rode around on horseback using horse bows and were able to like hit and run at people like no one's business.
This is true. This is now an episode about Genghis Khan. Discuss.
Yeah. Discuss the Khan.
I got nothing. That was the only factoid I had, and I can't even say with any confidence whatsoever that it was true.
Yeah, the only thing I know about Genghis Khan is that he's a leader in Civilization 5 and he gets horse archers.
Why is everything about Civilization 5 with you?
This is the first time I've mentioned it. How dare you,
Why do you
sir?
do this? Everything has to be about Civ 5. Here I am trying to talk about Tomb Raider, and all of a sudden you're talking about Genghis Khan and Civilization 5.
I just want you to love the games I love.
Nobody loves Civilization 5 anyway.
That's a lie, and I know it.
That's why you got so many votes for XCOM for your stream.
That's true. That's why no one voted for Civilization 5. It all makes sense now.
Do you remember when we started this show talking about reboots and remakes and we got completely off topic?
Did that happen? Oh, man.
I don't think so. Was that last episode?
I lose track.
Anyway, there have been others. Another World, for anyone who's been paying attention, was re-released again. I think it was the 25th anniversary edition, which means that game's been around for at least 25 frigging years. And it seems to get, well, it's not really a reboot, it's a remake every sort of 5 years or so. I know there's been the 15th, the 20th, and the 25th anniversary version where they just give the game a bit of a HD makeover and re-release it. I played through it recently, and the controls are still as crap as they were in the original. So it brings us to a good point with reboots and remakes specifically. What do you reckon defines a reboot specifically? Because a remake is just when they've polished up the gem or the turd that was the original game in what I think is usually a cash grab. What would you define as a reboot?
Well, you really sort of... Yeah, you need to think about it, like, because you are correct. If you're just bringing the same game to a new generation of, like, gaming PCs or consoles and just basically giving it a HD remake, it's not really a reboot. It's just bringing something forward into the new technology boost. Whereas, like, a reboot, like, I imagine they've done it with movies and stuff as well, where you take the original source material and instead of just making a copy, you give it a twist, you give it a little bit something different, and make it something the same but different. Like, give it the people what they loved about the original while giving them all the new shinies as well. It's really hard to explain, but yeah, I think a reboot is the same thing but with a modern twist.
That's a solid point. I mean, it's using the original assets, so a beloved character or setting.
Wait, are we talking about Tomb Raider again? Assets? Did you get it?
Oh, I see what you did there. We've drifted to that level. We're so sorry.
We have to appeal to the younger crowds.
This is true. We have to appeal to the kids. To any adult female gamers out there that have been offended, we're sorry to both of you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say something really crude there. I'm just sorry.
This episode will be edited. Anything we've left in, we'll have you know, is the cleanest things that we said.
That's a lie. We do everything in one take. We don't edit anything.
That's true. Editing's a painful and expensive process, and we don't have any money.
Yeah, that's true. We don't have any sponsors or any ads or anything.
Regardless. So it's just taking a new setting to either old assets or putting old assets into a new setting. So if you take Tomb Raider, for instance, because, you know, we haven't discussed that already, they've taken Lara and they've put her into this origin story, and they've tweaked a little bit, I think, her origin story. I don't think it was really fleshed out all that well back in the 8-bit days. So I think that's almost what you can define as a reboot. We did a little bit of research before this show because we're committed journalistic gaming podcasters like that.
Yes, everything we do is very accurate.
We looked up video game reboots on Wikipedia, and it's interesting to see what Wikipedia define as a reboot. They were saying things like the latest SimCity is a reboot. I'm not sure whether I necessarily agree with that. I mean, essentially, is every SimCity a reboot if you don't just put a new number on the end? I mean, all you're still doing is building cities. It's not like you're extending the storyline of your great metropolis.
Well, I think this is sort of where you're hitting the nail on the head. Like, there are many games which had like a series back in the day and then stopped being made and then came to the modern age with new technology, and that's what you can consider a reboot. Like with your Tomb Raider, you could sort of say technically it's a prequel, but it's just made with new tech for the new generation.
I see what you did there. Yeah. Peter Quill, Guardians of the Galaxy, yeah. Star-Lord.
That was totally the segue I was going for. I've just got it on the mind. It was a great movie. Go see it. Anyway, but then you got, like you said, your SimCity. Like, they were just adding numbers onto the end and adding new disasters and new building types and stuff, but nothing great. But then with the new SimCity, it was fresh and it was completely new the way they did. They had the whole DRM shenanigans and everything happening, but it was what made SimCity great is just you built your city on rock and roll usually, but then you had like what was that other one was getting done? The XCOM, Enemy Unknown. We mentioned it in a previous podcast. Like, they had the original XCOM Enemy Unknown back in the day, and they had the Terrors of the Deep, which was an expansion, and a few other things as well. And then there was nothing. And then they just bought the new game, the slightly new gaming system, and much high HD graphics, and brought it into the new era of gaming. And so, yeah, I'm confident in saying that SimCity is a reboot, is the crux of my rant.
Era is the appropriate term, I believe, mostly because it probably comes down to a generational gap. Because we had these series of games and they all stopped getting made in the late 90s or early 2000s, there's been anywhere between 5 or 10 years between the last one and the one now. So I think if you brought out SimCity and called it SimCity 5 or SimCity 11.1 or whatever, you would have this generation of gamers to be like, oh, this is a fifth one. I'm not going to pick this up. I haven't played the first 4. I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to know what's happening. And you might be appealing to, in the case of SimCity, 13 or 14-year-old kids. It's like, hell, I wasn't even born when the first game of that came out. There's no point in me trying to get in on number 5.
Yeah, it's a very, very valid point there. Basically, what we sort of alluded to in the beginning, it could, instead of trying to bring back nostalgia, although I'm sure that's a very valid point in it, is maybe it is just sort of like game companies trying to cash in on a new generation's want for good games and just taking all the great ideas that had been used in the past and bringing them to a new generation.
Probably is a double-edged sword, really. I mean, in terms of marketing, they need to appeal to a new audience to widen their market share, and they know because it's got that one key word, SimCity, Tomb Raider, and all that. All us nostalgia geeks will be like, oh my god, I remember that when I was a kid, and you'll go out and buy that game regardless, as well as the new generation will get it because they think it's a brand new game and a brand new IP because they're too young and stupid to know any better and to know that SimCity was better when it was SimCity 2000, not this DRM Online bullshit fucking...
Which isn't DRM Online anymore, just as an aside. It's now, you can do officially single player.
Took them long enough.
Yes, it did. Yeah. So, which is what...
I might do an episode on DRM because I could rant on that for hours.
Oh, yeah, I tell you what.
Stay tuned for episode 11. Tolly rants about DRM.
And stay tuned for episode 12. Non-lethal rants about, whatever Tolly's ranting about, I guess.
Episode 12, non-lethal gets a word in edgewise.
I do need a whole episode where just you aren't around, where I can just rant about whatever the heck I want.
We may do that one day.
That's never going to happen. Who are we kidding? But we've sort of got into an interesting area here with the generational gap, and it's sometimes successful and sometimes not. Like, people argue whether SimCity was successful or not. It was a good game, but it had some bad press and some bad DRM and things that made it really bad. Tomb Raider had a great success, I'm willing to say, and it was officially a reboot. But then you have games like your Syndicate. If anyone who is older than Tolly and maybe my age will remember the old games Syndicate and Syndicate Wars, where it was like a top-down shooter, basically, where you controlled a team of 4 people and you were cybernetically enhanced government secret agents and going and murdering people. It was great. But then this new one, they turned into like this first-person shooter where you had like a hacking overlay and you had to like strip people's brains of their cybernetic implants as part of their missions. Like, it felt like they just strapped the old Syndicate IP onto what could have been a really cool first-person shooter in its own right, just to try and cash in on some nostalgia, and it fell hard.
That happens a lot, I think, at the moment. There's a lot of games where they're just slapping old name titles onto what could have been brand new IP, seemingly for market value, and it's just falling flat. Like you're saying with Syndicate, which I haven't played because I'm essentially an embryo, not old enough to remember all that if they had have released it as its own game, it may not have sucked, but because the older generation of gamers are comparing it to what they remember through their rose-coloured nostalgic glasses, it may have done a lot worse than it perhaps should have if judged on its own merits.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. But we mentioned earlier the new XCOM reboot, and again, the original game was very, very old, and people older than Tolly wouldn't remember it. But the new game, while it was different in gameplay and it was graphically similar but still very different, it still had that level of difficulty that appealed to the people who loved the original game, and it still had that same reasonably similar storyline as well. So I think if you hit enough nails on the head, a reboot can be very, very successful, as long as you don't deviate too far from some of the core things that made the original game great. And we've seen that sort of thing in the new reboot of Mortal Kombat. In the original, people loved bashing each other, blood flying everywhere, and most importantly, fatalities. And in the new Mortal Kombat, it's like really, really high def, and they've got new characters and like 3D arenas and weapons and whatnot, but they've really stuck to like the core gameplay. It's a fighting game. You can do big fatalities, but they've also amped it up a few notches and put in like the X-ray moves where you can like crunch bones and splatter organs and stuff. And that's what people loved about Mortal Kombat. So that's why take my money, give me my game.
Yeah, they certainly took what made that game great and improved on it, instead of trying to just throw in new mechanics and stuff just to make it different for different sake. I know Mitchell touched on this a while ago when we talked about innovation in gaming. It's not always good to just throw something new in there, especially in the case of a reboot, just for the sake of it. A lot of the changes they made in Mortal Kombat were aesthetic, and they tightened the controls, but they didn't necessarily throw in whole new fighting mechanics just because it's a new Mortal Kombat, we should do things differently.
Yeah, well, that's right. Like, they added in a very, very few new things over the years, like new characters, the 3D arena where you can like dodge up and down, and weapons, I think, is pretty much the only new things they've added in. Whereas like differences in gaming generations like this, like I remember Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Budokai. It was a fighting game on PlayStation, and that was really, really lots of fun. And then I got Tenkaichi Budokai 2 and Tenkaichi Budokai 3, and it made it easier to pull off combos and get off big super moves and stuff, and it just made the game no challenge, and so I just stopped playing it really, really fast. And yeah, that's going to go out to a very niche area of our listeners, but hey, if you know what Tenkaichi Budokai is, props to you.
That was phenomenal. You managed to say that 4 times without screwing it up.
Tenkaichi Budokai?
5. Massive. No, we just had to take the one take where you got it right, and we had to copy and paste it over the others.
Please don't diminish my awesome.
Okay. Speaking of remakes, because segue, let me ask you this. For you to consider something a remake, would it have to stick to the original game in terms of perhaps controls and, in a sense, graphics, or at least the overall aesthetic feel completely? Or would you let the developers or the remakers or whoever tweak it a little bit if it was in the interest of improving some of the shortcomings of the original game?
I'm in the latter boat. I'm happy for developers as long as they stay true to like the feel of the original game. They can make whatever innovations they like as long as it doesn't feel like a completely new game, which is why I like the new XCOM, and I loved the original XCOM. They are different games in the way they play and the way they look, but it still feels like you're playing an XCOM game. And it's what I'm looking forward to in the upcoming Star Wars Battlefront. I played the original Star Wars Battlefront a lot. I loved it. And now that it's gone to a new developer, and instead of being like a sequel, it appears they're doing a reboot of it, I'm really excited to see what they do. Like it appears like it's going to be more of the same. Like it's going to stick into the same big battlefronts. You have first-person shooting perspective in the different classes or roles or whatnot, but just in high def. And I'm happy for them to do. I'm happy for them to go either way. Like, if they take innovation, it's fine, as long as they stick with what made the original game great and what made the original game worth playing.
Well, the reason I bring it up is they've recently released the remake of Abe's Odyssey, which was a bit of a cult classic back in the PlayStation days, and it's had its few sequels, and then the developers sort of went belly up, and nobody knows what they're doing anymore. I don't think they even know what they're doing, but there was a remake, so not a reboot, still the original story, still the original gameplay in a sense, but they made some crucial changes. They actually rebuilt the game from the ground up. They just didn't go and slap some high-res textures or turn up the res on the old engine. They rebuilt the damn thing, and in Unity no less, I believe, because Unity's the bomb. Indie game devs unite. And they made some changes. They tweaked the controls up a bit so they weren't so shit like they were in the friggin' original. And they changed how many guys you have to save, and they added some difficulty options. They even re-recorded some of the voices, I believe, and it brought some ire from the hardcore fans who loved the original, because they essentially took something that was good and sort of really messed with it in a way that a lot of hardcore fans didn't like. I'm sure people in the new generation or people who didn't play it originally would be fine. Like, I didn't play a lot of the original game. I played probably about halfway through it, and I went, screw this noise, life shouldn't be this hard. But playing through the reboot, it's not so bad. It's a lot easier to control. I'm finding I'm enjoying the game a lot more because they've tightened up the controls, and because I can put it on pansy mode and play through it essentially on easy. But is that something in terms of remakes that developers should be doing? They should just rebuild the whole thing the way they wanted to originally, or should they be tweaking it up to fix the parts that were crap, like shonky controls?
Well, I think it's really a fine line you need to walk with those sorts of things, because you may suffer as a term I'm coining right now, the George Lucas curse. Whereas, like, if George Lucas had his way, he would be touching up all of the Star Wars movies from now until the day he dies. Just because new technology and new innovations and new ideas that he has, he would want to put into those movies. And it's the same thing with gaming. If you just had someone who just wanted to keep on adding new features or new engine into their game and bring it into a new graphical territory, then it's not necessarily for the best. But it all comes down to, like what I said before, the feel of the game, the spirit of the game. And as long as you hold true to the core ideals of the game, like, whatever you do should make the fans happy, in my opinion.
As you were describing that, all I could think of was bloody Peter Molyneux, who, as many people know, was the founder, I believe, of Lionhead Studios. He created classic games like Black and White, and he's very well known for the Fable series. And the problem we had with Peter Molyneux and the Fable series is he seemed to promise a lot more than he could deliver, or what technology could deliver. And he'd say how you could live in this awesome breathing world, and how it would be, you'd be able to plant a tree, and as you grew up and got older, the tree would grow and it'd be fantastic, and it'd be like the Matrix, but you could play as a dude inside it, and all this sort of stuff. And Peter had a lot of trouble keeping this goddamn mouth shut, so we had these huge expectations for Fable, and then it come out and it was just kind of an action RPG, which didn't have class systems, therefore was epic.
Fable did do something right, it would seem.
Yes. So it was a good game on its own merits, in my opinion, but because Peter said all those things, he really hyped it up, and he had his chance in recent times. Not necessarily him, it was done by someone else, but anyway, where a remake was made of the original Fable. So, and it was interesting because they just tightened up some of the problems a little bit and did up the textures and all that sort of stuff, and basically the former of what I was talking about before, where they basically just slapped a new coat of paint on it and went, give us all your money. why don't, when studios are doing this, like if they're doing a cash grab, it's like, let's just slap paint on an old game. Why don't they give it back to the original developers and let them do the things they couldn't do? Give Peter Molyneux a chance to deliver on those promises. I'm sure he would have loved that opportunity. He may not have. He might just be a jerk. But this is something we could be doing with remakes in games, is we could go back and have developers realize their initial vision, and we could give them the support to create what they saw in their mind's eye when they first thought of these games.
That's a very interesting concept. Like the gamer in me rejoices at this idea of giving the IP back to the original developers and just letting them do what they envisioned doing. However, the cynicism part of me, like the really grumpy old man part of me, goes, well, game developers won't be doing that because it takes a lot more money to let that happen. And if they're doing just a cash grab of an old IP, as you mentioned before, then they want to put as little money into getting the game out there as they can, so they can make as much profit off the game as possible.
You give me two interesting points there. One, we left 3D Realms with Duke Nukem because we thought the original developer could create something that they always envisioned, and it took them 12 fucking years to make nothing.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Duke Nukem Forever.
Everyone just yawned at Duke Nukem Forever.
So perhaps that isn't the greatest idea. I mean, obviously 3D Realms aren't the embodiment of every developer out there, but that is an instance where the experiment failed. However, it's interesting that you mentioned money, because a lot of these original developers that died out in the 90s because there was this massive massacre where AAA gaming came to power, a lot of these people are turning to Kickstarter to get us rose-tinted glasses gamers to fund them rebuilding their IP the way they wanted to.
Yeah, and even the independent gamers who could never compete in quote-unquote the real world of AAA gaming are getting their chance to have all their vision realized via Kickstarter and other such sort of crowdfunding sources. And there's a lot of games out there that have either made it or are going to make it from these sources.
Yeah, well, the one that rings out to my mind, and there will be a cult of gamers that know what I'm talking about, is Charles Cecil recently got funding to create Broken Sword number 5. And he created Broken Sword 1 and 2 back in the early days of adventure gaming, where everything could be 2D and hand-drawn and absolutely gorgeous. And then publishers got their hands around his neck and they said, make it 3D and make it awesome and make it all these buzzwords like cloud and stuff that we can make sure gamers buy it using, their beloved characters, in terms of George Stobart and Nico Collard, and thrust them into this horrible 3D world that they were never meant for. And it basically just wiped those memories through this filth that was 3D gaming for adventuring. And it was horrible. And it was interesting to see that Charles turned to Kickstarter and said, hey, we want to make it 2D, we want to make it like this. Publishers are laughing in our face. Give us money, we will build what you remember. We will build what we always wanted to build. And they got funding and they built the game. And as far as I know, because, professional journalism and research and all that, as far as I know, it sold well. It sold well in my book because I bought the damn thing and I'm usually a filthy pirate.
This is true. You are a Yar of the Yarring Seas.
I admit to nothing. This is a complete disclaimer.
But it's very interesting, the whole Kickstarter fascination with making old games. Like, there's plenty of games that have gone through the Kickstarter world to get made. I'm pretty sure the Shadowrun Returns went through Kickstarter, and I want to call it the Mega Man reboot, although it's not being called that, but it does have a lot of the original team who made the original Mega Man is making a new game that's very, very similar. And as you said, Broken Sword, and there's some old from the team who made the original Baldur's Gate 2 are making another game. So there's all these great old school games, all the teams behind old school games making existing or new IP that are just it's out there waiting to be funded or already funded, and these games are going to come to life back. The games of our youth is going to come to a new generation, hopefully, to be brought out so people can enjoy them like we did, and hopefully they don't just get targeted to us old nostalgia fools.
Well, it should be a good market indicator, really, that gamers out there want this sort of stuff, or at least a faction of gamers. I'm not sure there's many, 12-year-olds out there going, Mummy, fund the new Baldur's Gate game so I can play, retro RPGs and all that sort of stuff. But there's certainly a faction out there, and a faction with money. Us old people have $90 to spend on these games, and if you're kickstartering something that we want to play, or a style of game long forgotten, we will fork out money for that. We will help you make it if you've got a good concept, and if they're coming from teams that built the games of our youth. And I don't think, for lack of a better phrase, AAA studios are necessarily recognizing this. I mean, I know they've got their targets for their shareholders and all that sort of stuff, but it seems like there's a disconnect, and we'll probably do a show on this at one point, because I could rant on this for an hour as well. There's a disconnect between modern gaming companies and the gamers themselves. They don't seem to know what gamers want. And not to sidetrack too much, but I mean, it even seems that studios like BioWare have no idea what their gamers want, evidenced by the fact that for Mass Effect 4, or whatever they're calling it, whether it's a reboot or not, they're asking gamers, what do you want to see in this game? And on one hand, that's a good thing. It's like, oh, great, they're asking our opinion, they're asking it. But on the other hand, you got to wonder, do they literally not have a freaking clue what gamers want to see and play?
Well, it really gives me a lot of hope to see them asking those questions, because otherwise they'll just keep on going by their business plan and seeing what sells well and just pumping out games what they think people want to see. Whereas if they can make a game that is within their own realm of possibility and their own drive, but also give gamers like at least a portion of what they want, it can help steer the gaming industry and games of the future to what gamers want to see, instead of just what the developers want to make.
That's an agreeable point. The issue I take is, how sad is it that we've gotten to a point where developers just have to upfront say, we have no idea what the hell you people are even looking for. Just tell us, for the love of God, and we'll make it. I mean, it's a light at the end of the tunnel, which has been a really rough few years, almost a decade in gaming, where we've had crap like Call of Duty pumped out year after year. But is that light at the end of the tunnel the train that could mow us down, because these developers don't even know the audience they're trying to create exclusively for?
Well, think about it realistically. Like, you've got a generation of gamers making games, and they remember what types of games they like and how they saw games going. And then you get your new guys who are young, who are playing games now, and in 10 years' time, once they've done their training and their courses and whatnot, they get into a game development company. They can have some input, but you imagine not a huge impact on a game. It's only when a lot of the crew and the development team are changed over to this newer generation that they can start going into what they wanted in games and what they see games as heading as. But by the time that happens, there's another generation of games that see how gaming is going in a different direction again. So it's almost like a never-ending cycle of where almost half a generation or a whole generation behind in how we see gaming going and how we see games developing.
Yeah, perhaps you're right in the sense that there really does seem to be generational gaps happening more and more, and it seems to cause a drift between gamers in the sense that it's older developers, like they're usually your game directors are people who have been in the industry for 20 years, trying to understand what their target audience, say 12 to 21 year olds, want to play. So you've got these people who are in their 40s who grew up on 8-bit graphics, trying to make 3D games for this generation some 20 years younger than them, and not really knowing what they want. And I can agree with what you said before. I think it's a good sign that developers are just fessing up and saying, look, what do you want? Because we have no idea. But perhaps there needs to be more openness and transparentness, especially around these reboots and remakes, as to what gamers want to see. Do they want the reboot to take the original property, say Lara Croft, and just put her somewhere new? Or do they want to rebuild the story from the ground up? But if they do, does it necessarily need to be Lara Croft, or can it be Kara Loft?
Yeah, it's whether they want to stay true to the spirit of a game but make it a new IP, or whether they want to keep the original IP and make it a new game.
Well, here's another question for you: Is new IP essentially dead? Are game devs running out of ideas for new games? They seem to be doing a lot of reboots and remakes. Are they just trying to cash in on what they know sells, or are there a bunch of game designers sitting around in a room going, well, bug it if I know?
Well, I think that's an interesting point. Like, there's only so many genres of game that are really out there, and there's only so much true brand new innovation across a whole game that you can make, which is why I think they're doing a lot of reboots and remakes. But then again, there are new games out there that are really like grabbing people's attention and going, whoa, this is really cool. And there's been a few, like, they're sort of older now, but like things we've talked about in the past, like Infamous and like back in the day, your Halo and all that kind of stuff were really sort of great games of their time. But now they're getting aged, and like you're getting spiritual successes, like the spiritual successor of Halo is Destiny, for example, and so on and so forth. But like, now I'm just racking my brain to think of like a brand new IP or a brand new game that has really like just leapt out and just been amazing recently. And I'm sure they're out there, but brain fart, because we're thinking about reboots and remakes, and that's all I can think about.
Well, they're getting rarer and rarer, I think, is the problem. And I don't know whether it's just because I've gotten old and jaded or what, but it seemed like nearly every game that came out when I was younger, because I'm a crotchety old guy now, was new and fantastic, and you'd only ever rarely see a sequel, whereas I think studios are under that much pressure now to get back their 200 million they've pumped into a game, that you really need to work with characters and assets and settings that sell, that reach a market audience that's going to fill this $200 million hole you've just burnt in your pocket to build the thing.
Yeah, and we're in an interesting situation at the moment with emerging technologies and things where, like 10 years ago, like even PC graphics and console graphics were like nothing compared to what they are today. However, the curve of graphics and everything improving, I believe, is slowing down over time. So I suppose it'll give game developers, which developing a game takes a long time, let's be honest, it will give it a chance to maybe catch up with what people want today and what is possible on today's consoles and PCs, and maybe we'll get to see some new IP, because you can't just keep on really releasing the same game on what is essentially the same engine.
You're absolutely right there. Once all the remakes have been done and everything's in shiny HD, because that graphics curve is plateauing now, game studios are going to be forced to come up with new IP, and we're not going to be able to survive on reboots anymore. I mean, maybe you can take the same old character and have Donkey Kong Uber HD versus, Scorpion from Mortal Kombat or something. But at some point, there's only so much shine that you're going to be able to put on something, and they're going to have to start looking at stories and interesting ways to tell a story. And now that I say that, I can think of a whole crap ton of games that have been new IP that were fantastic. Last of Us, Beyond Two Souls was pretty good. Heavy Rain was pretty much fantastic, and I'm just thinking of all these good PS3 games that I've now played that were absolutely glorious in my opinion. So perhaps it's not as dead as I'm making it out to be.
Yeah, I think there's a chance for gaming to like really, as we've sort of said, once everything is in HD and once everything is all polished, like there's a lot of old retro games that they could just reboot or remake, but people will get sick of it and will need to get either new ways of playing games, and that's where they're trying to push in VR and like real world interconnectivity and like all that sort of thing into gaming. But until quantum computing comes into effect and we start getting super ridiculous fast PCs and like the Matrix and whatnot, people are going to have to come up with new games on these systems that people of a new generation are going to learn to enjoy. We're going to have to make new classics.
Yeah, well, it comes down to what gaming is all about, I guess, as an art form, is it's telling a story in an interactive manner. It's a story that you can explore the way you want to. You are the character moving through this universe as this story is unraveling before you, and I think that's hopefully in quote-unquote next gen what we'll start to see. I mean, graphics are as shining as they're going to get. 3D modelers are, doing the best job they can with the polygon counts they've got So now maybe it's time to get some writers in who have these brilliant story ideas that can only be told through an interactive medium like games, so we can have worlds that we can explore. And I mean, something like Journey jumps out at me. Now that was a 45-minute game that you can knock out in less than an hour. It didn't take 45 minutes to build, to play through. And not a word is said through that entire game, but it tells an absolutely amazing story. And it's a little bit cliched in how it ends and stuff like that, but the way it tells the story and the way you step through it as this little cloth black-faced character is absolutely touching, to the point where every time someone's like, oh, what's a good game you played in PS3, that always just springs to my mind, because it had that enthralling story where not a word needed to be spoken for me to experience something out of that.
Yeah, and absolutely right. Like, I loved playing Journey. It really had that immersive feel of like this gripping world and this amazing story. And as you said, not a word was said. It initially was left up to your imagination. What is this world? What's going on? But then as the story unfolded, you really were really sucked into this narrative. And that's the sort of thing I'd love to see both indie and actual developmental gamers get into these days.
I think that will hopefully be where we're heading. I think the reboot and the remakes and all that, I think it's a phase. I think it's a good phase to have, because we can relive our nostalgia. And as we said earlier in the show, it happens with movies in Hollywood all the time. They reboot things like Teenage Ninja Turtles, which is just so awful. And that was a bloody... that wasn't even originally a movie series. They've essentially rebooted it to make it into a movie, and that was just tripe. And I think it's just a phase that we're going through. It's a bit of a creativity lull, almost, or maybe it's just a new genre all of its own that we'll need to accept as it sort of sits over in the corner where we'll put it once we're through with this. And hopefully we'll start to see more innovation in terms of story, and not so much necessarily in graphics. I mean, pretty graphics are always good.
Yeah,
you love that.
We do.
Graphics are sexy. But hopefully we will move towards these really intricate stories that you can only tell through gaming. I mean, Journey the novel would be pretty dull. It's like, there's this dude, he's wearing a scarf and a black cape, he goes down the sand hill and then checks out some stuff.
You're a terrible literary person. Just by the way, you should never be an author. Just saying.
I would read that book the more I think about it.
All right, well, let's move this discussion on to... I've got an interesting question for you, Tolly.
Hit me.
Are you ready?
My body is ready.
Stop stealing my lines, which I stole from somewhere else. All right, so we've talked about reboots and remakes and where we would like the gaming industry to go in regards to remakes and reboots and new IP and whatnot. If given the choice, what sort of genre of games would you like to see have a comeback in reboots and remakes? Or more specifically, is there a particular game that you enjoyed in your youth that you would love to see be remade or rebooted for this generation?
Space Sims. The game is Freelancer. I didn't even have to think about that for a second.
That's not a bad answer. Like, I tend to agree with Space Sims. Like, Sims have gone out of fashion in that sense, but I love them, and my choice would be TIE Fighter. If anyone played TIE Fighter, or even the equally as fun, but in my opinion not as good, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, then you know what I'm talking about.
That's amazing that we actually agree on something in terms of a genre that needs to come back.
Yeah, what does the world come to?
It's also interesting that we say that, because we'll save this story for another episode, but next year is appearing like it will be the year of the Space Sim, so it's pretty exciting to see what might come of that and what other genres it might remind people once existed that we could perhaps bring back through reboots, remakes, or completely new titles within a genre once thought dead.
Yeah, maybe it'll help the game developers to realise instead of going onto specific titles and rebooting those, maybe they should be looking into genres, because it seems to be like we've had a lot of either open world sandbox, MMO, or first person shooter type games, but maybe we need to get back into those simulator-esque games and some of those other type of adventure-y sort of games.
I just want to take a moment to put this message out there. For God's sake, Microsoft, remake Freelancer or do a sequel or something.
And goddamn LucasArts, or if you're still around, or I don't know, with Disney takeover, what the hell's going
I was
on?
going to say, I think it's owned by Disney now. Tell Disney.
Someone remake TIE Fighter. I will throw all of my money at you. Put it on Kickstarter if you need to, you multi-billion-dollar corporation. I will give you money for it.
I was about to say, why don't we start Kickstarters for each of these individual games? We'll collect up all the money, and then we'll just go to those studios and just throw it at them. We'll just bundle it up, and it'll just be just throwing $10,000 stacks of notes at them, and it's just like, remake our games, you bastard.
Oh, I've got a better idea. What we'll do is we'll do the Kickstarter, we'll take all the money, we'll fly to these developers, we'll tell them our idea, and then we'll take that money and retire.
I like this better. Speaking of a game that needs to be rebooted, right? And I know this is something close to the hearts of you and I, which we'll get into in a much later episode when we have something to share on the topic, is for anyone out there that remembers, and it'll only be old pricks like me and you and people who are probably older, is Battletoads, originally made by Rareware. Doesn't that take you back?
It does take me back to my misspent youth.
That game was hard as balls.
And that's what I loved about it, was hard as balls.
And I can't remember, I think Microsoft own the copyright to it now. For God's sake, Microsoft, you own so much shit. Get making games, you bastards.
I know, you damn jerks. But I hear, maybe someone out there will make a reboot of the game or a HD remake of the game. There might even be an app for mobile games out there where you can get your leapfrog satisfaction. Who knows? Maybe someone should search for that thing.
Yes, subtly, you should search for a game called Leapfrog on Android and Windows Phone, because some bastard remade that goddamn bike racing level into an app.
The Turbo Tunnel level, the bane of all our existence.
That's right, those sadistic sons of bitches
who shall remain
remade
nameless.
that level. Who shall remain nameless, remade that level and put it into the App Store for your enjoyment. That name again is Leapfrog.
Leapfrog, searched on Android and Windows Phone.
So anyway, with that shameless plug aside for reasons unknown and for people unknown, perhaps that could be a thing, right? That somebody remakes this game, Battletoads, and I wonder if that's a way to convince these studios that it's worth doing. So, say someone remakes the game and releases it on Steam Greenlight or Xbox Live Arcade or whatever the hell they're calling it now, and then they get this takedown notice from Microsoft because, oh god, everyone's buying this and these people are getting money off our copyright and all this sort of stuff. Is that a way to convince these bastards that we want these games and that they should remake them because there's still an interest out there that has money?
Well, I can't think of a better way to convince a company that owns an IP that they should be using that IP is for someone else to use it and be making money off it.
I think it's highly illegal, but I actually wouldn't care. I think it just needs to be done, right? Because, I mean, they'd start off, they'd just send you a cease and desist. They'd be like, stop that noise and give us all the money you made, you bastards. And you could do that, and you could send along with your millions of dollars that you would have made a little letter that says, how about you remake it now, you bastards?
We'll even be creative, what's the word I'm looking for? We'll give creative input into the process, yeah.
Creative consultants?
Ooh, I like it.
That's a good job title. I need to get that on my resume.
Yeah, let's talk to Microsoft.
We should. Dear Microsoft... Oh, you meant offline.
Yeah, offline. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Awkward.
Anyway, with that, I think we've sort of covered all of our topics with retro gaming, reboots and remakes and IPs and whatnots.
You said IPs.
Anyway, tell us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/nerdsatnightcommunity what game you want to see remade. Tell us and we will comment on it, or we'll ignore it, either one of the two.
That's right. If there's enough of us that get behind it, maybe one of these studios will actually pay attention and remake the bloody thing. So my advice is to suggest Freelancer.
Space Sims in general. Let's not get bogged down on a title, let's just tell them what we want.
I agree with what you're saying. However, Freelancer, damn it!
TIE Fighter, damn it!
We could fight about this for days. Anyway, do that thing. Get on Facebook or even tweet us.
The Nerdcast.
At Nerds at Night.
Yeah.
Yes, Nerdcast words.
The Nerdcast. It's called the Nerdcast.
We are at Nerds at Night, or just do hashtag Nerds at Night, and then we can be trending, or whatever the word is that is the thing that makes us popular on Twitter.
And maybe I should look up how to social media.
Yes. If somebody wants to social media for us or with us, let us know. via social media.
Yes, on our Facebook or Twitters or somethings.
We're happy to include more people in the community. If you want to be on the show, we'd love to have you on. That way we can have a trying to avoid using. We could have a 3-way on Skype. Feel free to join in, even if you don't feel like you'd be particularly good at podcasting. Lord knows we aren't great at it, but we're trying every week. So if you want to be on the show, just drop us a line. You just have to hop on Skype one night and have a chat with us. We'll discuss whatever's on your mind.
And it'll be fun. Yeah, or if you want to get involved with some of our nerd streaming, and yes, that's a dirty term, for our video game series, we're going to be popping up on the website and up on YouTube at www.nerdsatnight.com. Yeah, we've already got quite a few people wanting to get involved, so you should get involved too.
That's right, we have a website now.
Yeah, holy crap, people, we have a website.
Bear with us while we're building it. It's a bit of a schmozzle at the moment. We're learning to interweb. It's taken a while, but we'll get there. If you have any opinions or if you want to get involved in helping us build that, just drop us a line on social media or, the website once it works.
Yeah, if you know how to website, let us know.
That's right. If you're a website nerd for Nerds at Night, email us at nerdsatnight@gmail.com.
Heck,
that's right. We have an email address as well. You can talk to us so many ways. We're just that inviting.
We are just all over the interwebs.
We want to share the love, so get involved, get on social media, or subscribe to the Nerdcast on iTunes, or if you hate that friggin' iTunes skullduggery, you can get the direct links to the MP3s via our website, and we'll probably post it up on social media and things. We're everywhere.
We are everywhere. We're right behind you.
That was terrifying. I actually had to turn around.
Anyway, thanks for listening, guys, to episode 10 of the Nerds at Night Nerdcast. I am Non-Lethal.
And I'm Tolly.
Thanks, guys. Good night.